We have a jam-packed show coming your way. We've got the boss of Racing Victoria in the studio live for the first half an hour. Plenty to discuss, and we've got lots of racing guests. We'll find you your Tuesday winners. Once again, the Bet365 Bet Boost landed yesterday. Well done to Warren Huntley. Well done to Will Larkin and the Corstons team for getting us off to the perfect start of the week. And I know Aaron Morrison, the boss, he loves his Bet365 Bet Boost. He cashed in yesterday and he's here ready to go again today. How are you, Aaron?
Great, Michael. It's great to be here again.
And plenty of news. The announcement early this morning is that the carnival will be rejigged as far as Group 1 racing is concerned, and it's a return back to the future almost to what we have previously known, especially in regards to the 1,000 Guineas.
Yeah, a bit of a shake-up and a change that's been really well supported by all the stakeholders across the industry following a lot of really good consultation. But essentially we're making some changes to 3 of the Group 1s at Caulfield. We're moving the Group 1 1,000 Guineas back onto Caulfield Cup Day to give that a second Group 1 race, one of the biggest days in racing, to bolster that card alongside the Everest in Sydney, of course. We're also moving the Group 1 Sir Rupert Clarke back to the Underwood Stakes Day in September, again adding another Group 1 race to that card. And then coming the other way to make sure that we continue to have Group 1 racing at the end of the carnival, the week after the Melbourne Cup Flemington Carnival, the 15th of November date. We're moving the CF4 Stakes, and that comes from February into the spring. And that becomes a new Group 1 race day for Caulfield on that Saturday, an important date.
I know there's been a lot of discussion about these races and the movements originally, especially the 1,000 Guineas. Now, you recently brought in a racing forum for stakeholders to discuss all of these things. And is that where you decided that this needs to be changed?
We did, and this is a great example of the consultative process that we've put in place, which I think is working really, really well. We're getting great input from people right across the industry, and I think you'll recall when I came into the role early in my tenure, I flagged that we wanted to seek the input and leverage the experience from right across the industry, and I think that's what we're doing with these forums. We get participation from breeders, from owners, from trainers, from jockeys, from all the clubs, and we debate issues that we put up, and we look at what's going to be best interest of Victorian racing, and we've come up with some great solutions, and this is a great example.
Did the previous hierarchical regime, did they get it wrong with the movement, especially of the 1,000 Guineas?
I think we probably did get it wrong, right, in one sense. I think they were the wrong races to move. I think what we have gotten right, though, is the fact that there is demand for an additional race meeting at the end of the spring following the Flemington Carnival. And we've shown that that's been successful. There's still great engagement and people want to enjoy and participate in great Group 1 racing. And so we think the Ore, as the new day, will deliver upon that.
The results in the 1,000 Guineas, ironically, had some pretty good horses winning those and pretty good form out of that, and I think the turnover stood up as well. But the pattern, which is all important, and the program in spring, I don't think anyone would argue works better from a flow point of view if you've got a very nice 3-year-old filly that wants to progress. Is that the feedback that you were given pretty strongly as well?
Yeah, that's right. That's been the primary driver, what's best for the pattern of racing overall. And so when we see the move of the 1,000 Guineas back, it's now 2 weeks after the Flight Stakes in Sydney. And so rather than disrupting the pattern in New South Wales, it's complementing that, and it means those fillies can come back to Melbourne and demonstrate their early form, and they can go on to races like the Empire Rose on Derby Day or the Oaks at Flemington. Yeah,
I know the MRC's been very keen to ensure that this change is made, and I'm hopeful of having John Kanger and Tom Rowley in the studio tomorrow to flesh it out, and their spring carnival as well. But the decision to put it on Caulfield Cup Day, the 1,000 Guineas, and make that a Super Saturday, what was the impetus on that? Was it turnover driven? Because previously we've seen the 1,000 Guineas midweek and in a few different days as well.
Yeah, I think it was really just to bolster that day.
Yep.
It's such an important day in our calendar, and we felt it needed some investment collectively, and I think this will deliver that. It's going to be an extra special day.
And the movement of the 1,400 metre race, which is obviously the CF4, back into that slot where you have the Group 1, there's always been a lot of discussion about the similarity of the futurity and the ore in the autumn.
Yeah, well, we had 2 Group 1 races with exactly the same conditions 2 weeks apart, which didn't really seem to make much sense. And I think that's been a point of debate for a long time. So it became an obvious race for us to be able to shift into the spring, and hopefully, that will be a fantastic day. There'll be the Sandown Guineas, of course, and also there's the 1200 metre Thoroughbred Club Stakes, which is a Group 3 race but has the potential over time to become a bigger and better race. So it should be a fantastic, cracking race day.
Yep, and Sir Rupert Clarke returns to
Underwood Day.
Underwood Day, so you've got the 2 Group 1s there as well. So I think from the MRC's point of view, and I would say from a lot of traditionalists and those that like the pattern and the flow of the Spring Carnival, they'd be pretty happy with this move.
Yeah, and I think that's come through loud and clear. We're obviously cautiously watching whether there's going to be any impacts to other parts of the carnival, but we've all sort of made a commitment that we'll do that. We think this is going to work really well, and I will say we had unanimous endorsement from all of the stakeholders that this was the right outcome. So we're really pleased with where we landed.
These are obviously major Group 1 races, and there is a flow on with other Group 2 and Group 3 races that change around. I'll talk more about those when we have our news segment, because I only have you until 9 o'clock. But are there any other major changes that you're looking at in regards to the overall Spring Carnival programming?
At this stage, they're probably the main ones. We're looking at the whole calendar throughout the year. We'll look at, it's not a spring change, but more a sort of current one, what races we put up against the championships, for example.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that because the Bendigo meeting is great, but when we've got a day which is a super race day, and everyone agrees the championships days are 2 of the best race days on the Australian calendar, it would be more, I suppose, advantageous to have a city meeting in Victoria?
Yeah, potentially. But having said that, the Bendigo Golden Mile, that's such an important race for that region, and it's certainly got a very strong place in the calendar. So we need to work out, what the right position for that is, noting, of course, the championships do tend to move around a little bit, so it's not easy to set in stone. But, there's the sorts of things that we're looking at, how we maximise engagement and piggyback off some of the other quality racing that exists around the country. I saw you up there on Saturday in Sydney. Yeah.
Yes.
You had a good time.
Why don't we have another 3,200 metre race? No. Look, it was a great day. I did note the crowds probably for a day like that weren't as strong. Yes. So it's we hear a lot of talk about where are the crowds here in Victoria. It's not a state singular issue, especially when football seasons are on. You've got good weather. That product should have had a huge crowd drawn to the track on Saturday, but it wasn't that strong.
No, I think it shows that we're all experiencing the same dynamics, and it probably also shows we're doing a lot of things right down here in Victoria. I think the autumn was really positive. The crowds were pretty good and engagement was high from a turnover perspective. We were pretty happy with the outcomes. Field sizes were strong. So all of the sort of key metrics were fantastic. And then, of course, over the spring, we had record crowds, we had growth, so we're doing some things right down here.
What about the Cox Plate? That's the big one that we still haven't finalised, not for this carnival, but the following carnival. When are we going to have a decision on where that race is going to be run?
Yeah, still a little bit of work to be done there. Some really good dialogue going on, noting the significance of that race and the importance to our overall program and calendar. There's a fair bit of work being done. I think it's fair to say everyone understands it would be a choice between either Caulfield or Flemington. It's important that we get the right outcome for the industry, and you would measure that in terms of things like engagement, attendances, wagering turnover, but also has to work for the club. The MVRC, still own that race day, so to speak, and it needs to work for them commercially and for the partners that are supporting the club as well. So a few things to be balanced up, but I reckon we're probably still a month away or so, I think.
Other announcement that we're awaiting is a pretty important one, and that's prize money levels. Yeah. Do you anticipate, with the budgeting process underway right now, that prize monies will remain at the current levels?
That's certainly been a goal and a stated aim. It's a bit of a North Star for us in terms of how we go about managing a budget for a year. We're trying to keep returns to participants at the same levels where we can, but it's going to be a real challenge, and there are a few things that are a bit unique this year as well, which make it trickier. We just spoke about, Moonee Valley, for example. We lose those races and they're going to need to be moved to other tracks, which might not be at the same level from a wagering turnover perspective, right? So we've got to consider what that means in terms of the revenues generated for industry. Bendigo will be offline for a little bit. Obviously, the wagering market remains challenging, and so we've just got to work through, what we can afford, what we can do. But certainly, we're aiming to try and hold levels similar to where we can. And then within that envelope, whatever that is, we also need to be smarter, I think, about how we're allocating prize money. And there's been some really strong and interesting and quite sensible submissions from a number of stakeholders. Again, kind of related to the racing forum process. We've received submissions from most of the stakeholder groups over the last week or so, which we're working through. But we'll look at ways in which we might, allocate and shift some of that prize money around.
So keep the level ideally where it is at, but there could be a realignment as to the prize money levels of different races.
I think that's right, but keeping it at the level is going to be a real challenge, right?
Okay.
We are, the business model's under a bit of pressure, and we'll do our best to try and keep them at the same levels, but it is going to be a challenging year.
And those meetings that get moved from Moonee Valley, particularly the Friday night meetings, will they be split between Pakenham and Cranbourne?
They will, and so obviously the venues with
Yep.
lights, so all of those meetings will go to Southside, Pakenham, Cranbourne. Some meetings go to Geelong, some meetings will go to Caulfield.
Just on the wagering landscape, we're all awaiting what occurs federally as far as the election is concerned, and then the wagering bill, which has been put on the back burner. If we have a hung parliament, it could well give the Greens and other independents a lot of power. How concerning could that be for what this wagering bill looks like?
I think that, and along with some of their other commentary around wagering and gambling and racing, is very much a cause for alarm. At the moment, I don't think there's been a lot of debate in recent times, and I think the wagering operators have started to scale back some of the advertising. There's not a lot of above-the-line noise. I mean, the formal position from the current government is that they want to deal with this after the election in an ideal world. And they've spoken about giving racing carve-outs and exemptions, noting, the unique relationship between racing and wagering, which is different to other sports. They acknowledge that we are different and we've got that commitment formally, but there is that risk that it could become a political football. But I think it hasn't been an issue that's been in the debate recently, and hopefully, that sort of stays below the line and we get the opportunity to address it properly after the election.
What has the turnover figures looked like in the last few months?
It's been a little bit better, Michael. I think a couple of times I've come on and we've spoken about we had a really soft start to the financial year. In the first quarter, we were down 10 or 11% year on year. And then we picked up a bit through the Melbourne Cup Carnival. The last quarter, ended March, we were actually just above flat. We had some slight growth. I think we were 0.3% up turnover-wise. So you'd say there's certainly green shoots. We had some benefit of comping against some abandonments last year, and of course interstate, they had some abandonments this year with some significant weather events that we were the beneficiary of. But you'd have to say, that's looking a lot more positive than it had been at the beginning of the year. You're seeing WSP margins sort of softening, so that means the punters are winning a bit more and they've got some ability to reinvest. There has been some return of generosity, but unfortunately not to the same levels that we saw last year. So this time, for example, over the championships, you were seeing money-back specials on all races across Sydney and Melbourne. And now we're sort of back to races 1 to 7. So not getting the same level of generosity from WSPs as a punter. And we're also seeing over-rounds continue to widen as well. So worse odds to the punters. So, there's a little bit going on here and, we're watching what's going on, but hopefully some green shoots.
I suppose just off that, is there any taxation changes in regards to to wagering that you can see in the future?
No, I don't think so. And we're having conversations at a national level, and I think the risk was that it might be something that the New South Wales government might consider leading with. But the latest we're hearing is the industry is very well aligned around pushing back against that. And I think the sector really understands that we're really at a tipping point with taxes and fees and cost of product. That would be disastrous. So hopefully that's not going to happen.
A couple of SMSs here, and this is a question I was going to ask you. We had some pretty big headlines a couple of weeks ago. Eddie Maguire saying that the AFL is seriously contemplating pushing the entire season back into mid-October for a grand final. Is there any truth to that rumour? Have you been in discussions with the AFL?
I've been in discussions with the AFL. I spoke to Andrew Dillon about that. Look, they've obviously got to consider a number of options, but I think that was a particular proposal that Eddie floated, and doing what he's very good at is just sort of generating some debate, conversation. I'm told there's no current plans. That's not a plan that's being endorsed by the committee, but we need to obviously be watchful of that. If it did happen, then we should be starting to think about how we make that work to our advantage. Given the numbers of people that could be floating around, but the mail that I have is it's not on the agenda at the moment.
Okay. There'd be no, as previously we've seen, a push to maybe push everything back. That would not change?
No, we haven't been speaking about that. But, in Andrew Dillon, you got someone who's a keen punter and follower of racing as well. And he understands how racing works. It's not a simple matter of just moving one race meeting or changing from a Saturday to a Friday. We've got the whole pattern schedule tied together. He understands that. So we'll continue to talk, yeah.
Speaking of that pattern, that schedule, you said you're in Sydney, and I believe you caught up with Peter V'landys. How is that relationship, and how is getting everyone together to sort out this Australia-wide pattern going?
Yeah, I did catch up with Peter. I went up there to congratulate him and wish him success for the day. It looked like a good meeting. Relationship's fine in terms of the pattern. There hasn't been an awful amount of movement there, Michael. We're still working through with the Asian Pattern Committee, and I think everyone would have seen recently, you saw ERPAC and CETA come out and say they're not formally recognising some of the races that were recently upgraded. And so I think what that demonstrates is that we need to engage with some of those stakeholders better. They can't be kept out of a system and a solution. And so that's really the focus at the moment at a Racing Australia level. But that's really a matter for Racing Australia to comment on and engage with. Can
you get a comment out of them? We can't. I mean, it is ludicrous, isn't it, how long this is taking, and to try and circumvent what has been a sticking point for so many years.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of the politics. But, I think we'll just focus on our own backyard. We started this conversation talking about how we've done some great things down here off the back of engaging with our stakeholders, leveraging this experience that we have, and that's how we intend to go forward. So for our part, we're certainly staying very engaged with breeders and bloodstock agents and working through in the right way.
There's a few SMSs here about what they would like to see, punters would like to see, and we've spoken to the MRC about this, we've spoken to Flemington, and it is a club issue, but getting people back to the track and the cost of going to the races, how important is that from a Racing Victoria point of view as well?
Very important, absolutely. Taking away any sort of barrier to participation and engagement is really important. I think the clubs have come a long way, though, in the last 6 months. I remember sitting here talking about, I think it was Southside who trialled their initiative first, and then it sort of caught fire. All the clubs have had some version of, reduction in prices, food and beverage, at the gate. So all credit to them, but there's clearly more that can be done, and that's something that we've got to address.
And Southside's almost been a flag bearer for bringing those two clubs together, one super club, the streamlining. I know Kanga at the MRC has said he's in favour of trying to bring the three metropolitan clubs together. Is that something Racing Victoria wants to see as well?
I think we certainly want to see clubs working together, sharing services, where there are things that they're doing which are common across the clubs. It would make sense to try and find ways to do that in a more efficient manner. share resources. Whether that leads to anything bigger than that, well, we'll see. That's not necessarily the sort of key issue here. It's just about making sure that we're not wasting money, or we're not duplicating things unnecessarily, or adding, governance and slowing decision making. So there are some obvious things I think that can be done, and I would say there's some really good conversations happening now at a CEO level, at a chair level. We've got some new faces around the tables at clubs, Racing Victoria. So I think we're heading in the right direction.
How is the relationship with all of the stakeholders? I know I had a robust interview with Jonathan Munns not so long ago in regards to what the relationship is like with TROA, trainers, jockeys. Where is that at the moment?
Yeah, I think Jonathan's got some strong opinions, but he's also got a lot to offer in terms of experience and ideas. I think we're getting along pretty well at the moment, and I think that's, again, off the back. I hate to keep talking about it, but it does demonstrate the power of a good consultative process and giving all the stakeholders an opportunity to have their say on important issues. That doesn't mean that they get what they want all the time, and it's almost impossible to deliver an outcome in racing that everyone's happy with. But if you can demonstrate your reasons why, you provide sound analysis, and you're doing it in the best interest of the industry and the people that are investing in the industry and the people that got their blood, sweat and tears tied up with the industry, then I think people are coming around and supporting what we're doing at the moment, and the industry's in a pretty good spot from a stakeholder perspective, I think.
The catalyst for that chat, and a lot of the discussion at the time, was the angst between the trainers, the jockeys and the owners in regards to jump out payments. Now, That's gone very quiet since jockeys went back to jump outs. Has that ended now, or is there still a type of negotiation ongoing?
No, I don't think it's ended. I think the jockeys have been looking in the background at whether there are any opportunities to tackle the issue another way. It's a really tricky one because it's a very unique employment relationship that exists. Racing Victoria is effectively sort of a payments administrator. We actually don't employ jockeys. So many people are saying, Racing Victoria, why don't you just come out and make the payments to jockeys? We actually don't manage that relationship. That is a relationship that does exist between a trainer and a jockey. But having said that, the jockeys are still keen to make sure there is some kind of payment, whilst at the same time, the other part of the conversation is the acknowledgement of the rising cost of owning a horse and training a horse, right? And so we've got to be careful not to impose new costs onto owners and trainers as well. So we've got to find a solution that exists somewhere in between all of that. Those discussions are not dead. We're working through those in the background with some of the stakeholders to see if we can find some solutions, but there'll need to be some compromises if we are to get a solution one day.
Another SMS here saying, in regards to programming prize money, you're happy with the All-Star Mile. Do you want to see more reviews or changes made to it?
We made a few changes to the All-Star Mile over the years, and obviously this year we ran it sort of for the first time in its permanent home at the VRC, or at least for that 3-year period. I think the event was a bit different. We didn't have the sort of owner ambassador program. It wasn't as strong. That the sort of national voting program, I should say, didn't exist this year. So I think we might have missed a trick with the marketing of it, and in the build-up. So that's something that Kylie and I have been speaking about, and have acknowledged we could do better collectively. In terms of the prize money, I don't see any necessary need to look at that, but there have been a few stakeholders who have suggested that we could continue to repurpose even more of that funding into other races. That's an option we'll look at, along with other things.
Streamlining, it's what everyone's doing at the moment, trying to cut costs and trying to be more efficient. And the Racing Victoria media business is a part of that as well. Andy Hode's come on as the new boss of the media only the last few weeks. Where's that transformation at right now?
Well underway, and you guys are a part of that, of course. So Andy's come on board. He joins us from Entain, where he ran the content business there and also their media businesses. And his priority is to really grow the business, right? Is to leverage the assets that we've got to tell the stories of racing and reach a broader audience. So that's really what he's focused on. So he'll review all of our assets, all of the content that we make, and I've really encouraged him to push that a lot harder. And hopefully people are saying, if you're following racing on different platforms, TikTok, even on Twitter or X, there's a lot of new type of content on there, non-race day content, which is really trying to tell the stories of, whether that be the jockeys or even the contribution that's being made out in the community through some of our country racing clubs, focusing on all the great things we do with equine welfare, really just trying to tell all of those stories beyond just the race day. From an efficiency perspective, which is where you started, that's probably been more my focus. We've simplified the governance. Hopefully we can start to speed up some of the decision making there, and that's not just about the media business, that's across the whole RV group. And that's been a really big focus of mine, and it's important, and we need to do that so that we've got the capacity to continue to invest back into the industry at the levels we have been, which again, as I said, is really a North Star for us.
And just the last one, because I know you've got to go. A lot of the finance that you've been focusing on previously was because we had a joint venture with the TAB. That joint venture has ceased, and I think you've been open and honest. We've discussed it before that whilst that deal was that we should be no better off, that hasn't actually transpired that way, especially for a lot of participants and punters in Victoria. We don't have tote windows being operated on country tracks anymore with the TAB. Where is that at?
The tote issue in particular?
Yeah.
Well, that TAB are due to come back to us with a proposal around how they want to service tracks going forwards. The turnover that has been lost has really shifted to the Victorian bookmakers, right? So there's been a benefit there, and there's a bit of work being done by that cohort to see whether they can offer more types of bets going forward as well, and potentially be a solution, maybe even as an agent, a tote reseller. So there's a fair few conversations still happening in that space.
Okay. I'm trying to get Gil on. I still am. How close are we, do you think, to this mythical nationwide single tote pool?
Single tote? Well, that's going to come down to New South Wales's participation. And I'd say that's very much tied in with some things that Gil and Tabcorp are looking to do with New South Wales around their version of what we used to call the joint venture here, their RDA. So they're going through a whole process there. But certainly high on the agenda, I understand from speaking to him.
Very good. I appreciate your time. I know you've got another meeting to go to, so we will have a longer chat at some stage when we get the full program, which isn't too far away, and also prize money announcements as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Good to chat again.
Good to see you, Aaron.
Thanks.
Aaron Morrison.